Reform Advisory Committee. We will have a long meeting of discussion, but before we begin that discussion, I do want to start the evening with a moment of silence for Jacob Blake, whose family recognized and mourned him today, and who across the country we have been thinking of and grieving with his family. So I want to take this moment, if we can, to have a moment of silence and remember him and his family with those who loved him. Thank you. And as we do that, I think it truly sets the tone for why we are here. As Jacob Blake's sister said today, we are here because we are human. We are here because we are committed to a public safety process that recognizes the humanity across our community, that is committed to public safety for all, and that hears the voices that say that we have considerable work to do there. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know, because I talked to many people, that we have many people watching on YouTube. We have many members of our police department watching on YouTube. We have many members of our community. We have people, I understand it, actually from across the country watching these meetings. And I think the reason for that is that we are together truly committed to engagement and dialogue, and to being thoughtful and deliberate in discussing where we are and what that means for us as human beings on this community, on this committee, but more broadly within our community, to really taking the time and the thoughtfulness that these topics deserve. So I want to thank all of you. I thank you at the end of every meeting, but I also want to thank you at the beginning, just for the dedication that all 15 of you have showed in this process to really moving our community forward and to providing the thoughtfulness and reflection that public safety, and that moving forward on public safety to public safety that is marked by community well-being and justice truly deserves. And with that, I will turn it to all of you.
Thank you, Lane. So we've got lots to cover tonight. I see our final committee member was just there. He popped off, so we'll grab him as soon as he gets back on. Since we have so much to get through tonight, hearing about the recommendations from the 6 subgroups that we created in the middle of this process to really be able to dig in, what I think would make sense is to kind of categorize our remarks from sort of 3 positions: either generally support but with changes that you'd like to see, or do not support. Because I think it's important that people understand that this committee is not a monolith, right? You all have very different backgrounds, you all have very different perspectives. That's why we put you here together. And so everybody deserves to have their point of view on the record, so to speak, so that we can show the community and show everybody where we're coming from with these recommendations. I wanted to give anybody who wanted to give any brief opening remarks the chance to do that, and then I will start going through section by section. Is there anybody?
Madam Chair and City Manager, I want to commend Mark and George and the rest of the committee, but in reading the summaries that these 2 gentlemen have put together, I think we have a very professional committee, and I think the record will stand with anybody else who's out trying to do this. I think our goals, when the language was captured, And I just wanted to say that before anybody else said a word. I commend you. Great committee, folks. The dialogue has been excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Lisa, really quickly, I just wanted to confirm. So we are going to be voting on if we're in agreement or not, because we were under the impression that today we would be actually talking about some of the things that was emailed in the final draft yesterday. So are we going to be talking about it first and then voting, or how's this going to go?
I think having a roll call vote, right? I think what we'll do is we'll just have a conversation. But I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to show where they stand on each of the areas. So if at any point there's part of a recommendation or part of a section that came out of a subgroup that you disagree with, this is certainly the space to say that. If this is a part that you feel like is something Santa Monica really needs, this is a space to say that. And if it's something that you think the city needs, but maybe we need to change it in the way that we framed it, this is a chance to say that, right? And so I think we don't necessarily need to have a 15-person vote for each one, right? Because there's a lot in the report. But if we go through section by section and we feel like there are things that were left unsaid, I think we have two opportunities. We can say them at the end. Everybody will definitely get closing remarks on the process. And then with this report, we want to make sure that there's everybody on this committee is clear. There's the opportunity to attach a written remark to the report. We can put it in a separate section so that, again, this isn't presented as a monolith decision. This is presented as, you know, how many people supported it and how many people had strong feelings about other parts of it. Does that feel okay for you?
Sure. I think what my concern was just reading the article yesterday. There's certain language that was used in the article that I don't think benefits the community nor policing. And I was hoping that we would have talked about some of these things before, because I didn't think we would vote today. It was my understanding that we would talk about these things and write recommendation drafts to be finalized for next week. And specifically what I'm talking about for use of force, at least, some of the language that was used as far as our policy not being, it says the U.S. Constitution is the minimum standard, and it says SMPD policy shall require force to be necessary and proportional, which I wanted to discuss a little bit, and I was hoping that we would be able to discuss based on what we use, which is objectively reasonable. And I understand it seems very wordy, but it's very important for us to know these things. For example, when you change our policy or you want to change our policy as far as saying necessary and proportional, we have to talk about these things. Well, who deems necessary and proportional? An example that I'll give you is, as a police officer, if I'm walking out of Starbucks and someone pulls a gun out on me and I pull my gun out and shoot him, is that necessary? Absolutely. And then after I shoot him and he dies and we found out that it's a fake gun, the question is, well, a real gun versus a fake gun, is that proportional? Absolutely not. But based on this language and based on if this was policy, I'd be in violation of policy as well as being civilly liable. Versus what we use, which is objectively reasonable. It's what the officer perceived at the time and the totality of the circumstances. So I think that's very important when we change.
Can I just make a procedural suggestion that perhaps maybe we go in order and let Lisa lead us through? I'm sure we'll get to discuss this topic, but rather than jump into the middle, maybe we can go in some sort of systematic order.
I don't think we should vote on what we think it's appropriate or not without discussing some of these things, because you can vote for something like this not knowing what this language actually says.
How about we adjust it this way? So we'll go through section by section, and if you have strong feelings that are opposed to it, you share those first, and then everyone else can share where they're coming from, so that if you have something that you think people don't understand or need to know before they really settle on their final position for these things, that you can preload the conversation with that. And that way we can continue to move through without feeling like there are nuances or considerations that are getting overlooked. Is that a more comfortable approach for people?
I think it's, wait a minute, I think it's Darnell, I think he's speaking to a conceptual piece in terms of in 6 weeks, we want to vote on everything that's in this package. And be honest with you, over the last 3 or 4 decades, nothing is in any of this report that hasn't been discussed over and over again. It's just that, excuse my expression, but not everybody's on board. And it's like, massa, is we sick? Everybody wants to do something about it. What I'm saying is that just in this total context of tours of the police station, I mean, it's not Universal's tours. I mean, I think this whole thing needs to be brought into a further constructive conversation for us to say, let's move forward on this body. This stuff has been around for a long time, and just the concepts need to be shaken out more so they can be supported or not supported. That's all. I agree, Darnell. I thought it may take a little bit more support, because as now, a lot of it I wouldn't be able to support. I think we need to do some of these things, but the way it's constructed, I don't think it'll be universally effective to particularly Santa Monica, because a lot of it references a lot of circumstances that doesn't reflect Santa Monica. Well, Santa Monica's had those issues. We've dealt with some of them. We've dealt with more with our, for example, more middle-class young African-Americans, not the young people who historically had issues. So at this point, I don't see that that's really a viable option. I mean, we can vote, but it may not get the support that being vetted better. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I see Nat waving his hand, and I just want to again say we are not doing a formal vote on these policies, right? This is really, consider this a temperature check to say, where are you when you come across these topics? Does this seem pretty close to where we need to go, or does this seem far away from where we need to go? It sounds like we have in Daryl and Darnell some areas where people think there's more places to go. And I think that's fair, and we should get that out. But I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't at least try to go through and take a temperature check on all the work and all the research that's compiled in the recommendations to see, right? Because I think, again, we shaped this process. I think the recommendations already involve a lot more additional process after any of these things. I don't think there's anything in here that is expected to get implemented as of September 8th or even October 8th or November 8th. And so I think this is really about, if we can step away from the word vote and we can step into the concept of sharing where we are on the concepts, I think that might be able to move us forward. And Nat, you go ahead.
I didn't know you were a mind reader. My feelings are that Darnell's point and Daryl's points are excellent. But correct me if I'm wrong. Are we talking about the document that just came out yesterday, 31 pages? And as I envision what you asked at the open the meeting, I wasn't worried about the vote, because there are a few typos and things of that nature, and each, like word usage, I think Darnell is on, and all of these things. If you go down the order and we expedite that, we may find 2 or 3 pages, we may jump 10 pages without anybody saying a word. But reserve in your mind where you want to hit hard and be prepared to articulate your concerns, and we'll get through this. If not, we'll never get through it. And I'll say this and not bragging. When I came on the city council, when I picked up the mayor's gavel, we ended 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning meetings, because we met with order and direction. And so I'd like to see this meeting go with some order and direction so that we can all be heard and respected, but not miss anything. That's what I thought I heard you say at the beginning.
I think that's what I said. Erica, and then Mike.
Only because we are dealing with a really long document that has a lot of language in it that is not necessarily reflective of all 15 members of this committee. I'm going to second Darnell. I'm very uncomfortable with doing anything that is even temperature taking when it comes to entire sections of this document, because we're going to be painting a picture as if there is agreement when we're really trying to get this done. And I feel like we were being put in a really difficult position to try and okay this very lengthy document based on, I mean, we haven't pulled out what the recommendations are yet that we would be necessarily. There's a lot of wording in between the recommendations at the bottom of each section. And I just think we need to make it very clear what it is exactly that we're going to be taking a temperature on, because it can't be all of the wording in this document. It just can't be. There's no way we would get that done tonight. And there's no reason why we would, I don't think we should be doing that at the end of a 6-week process. So that's just my objection.
I mean, I think what I would say, and hopefully we can find a way to move forward, right, is I don't think anybody who's been watching even the first 10 minutes of this meeting thinks that anybody, that you all are agreeing to entire sections of anything, right? I think it's pretty clear. We've heard from 3 people who are already expressing strong opinions. And I think the idea is to capture that for the concepts that are in this book of set of recommendations, right? Nothing more and nothing less. So I think if you have objections to all 6 areas of recommendations, then I think you would want to get that on the record as you're doing in the outset of the meeting. I don't think it harms the process to capture that from everybody. I think that's all that this is intended to be. Go ahead, Angela. And Mike, sorry.
So just so I'm clear, you are going to read like the beginning intro, which I think sets the framework of our approach, correct? Mm-hmm. I just want to make sure, because I think that will give everyone, not just here, but everyone who's quote unquote tuned in, our community, our steps of how we approach to where we are. So I just want to make sure that that was going to happen.
You know what? You're going to read it.
Wait, what now?
You're going to read it. Go ahead, Mike.
If Lane or Lisa could talk about the process after tonight, how much time is left for things like this? I know September 8th is the council meeting. How much time before that is needed for city staff to do their thing? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, Mike, we tried to engage quickly. It was important to me not to take rash action on my own, and to have a community engagement process. And that was reflected in the council passing the Obama Foundation Mayor's Pledge, which called for community engagement. At the same time, we also realized that the demand for a real look at use of force policies and otherwise was real, right? And that, saying we're going to take a year to consider whether we do anything was not the correct approach. And that's quite honestly part of the reason why we created this time frame. We would like to go to council on September 8th. So I intend to go to council on September 8th with some recommendations. But that is not the end. What we're looking for here is truly meaningful and lasting change. And so I think, do you have another week? Absolutely. We can, if you need another week, that's fine. I do think that we should try to come to some area, and whether it's, majority views and minority views or otherwise, however we want to state that, we should get some transparency around where the committee is so that I can use that to go to council. I think what Lisa is trying to do is to allow you each to talk on the record about the document overall. Honestly, I had hoped for, consensus recommendations across the board, but that's because I'm a hopeful, optimistic person. The task is too large for that, and our ambitions are too large, and that's an okay thing. So I think what we're looking for is a process that, at least by next week, I have something from you and some transparency so that I can reflect where the members of the committee were on the recommendations that you're presenting. And that can either be that they are consensus or that they're not, and that, concerns remain around the following things. And I respect Erica's point of view that, the drafting, there may be people who want to say, I just can't sign on to the report overall, but I can offer agreement on some of the following points. And I think that's okay too. So I think what Lisa was trying to get to is just some transparency around where people are so that we understand where the recommendations are coming from.
Rolinda?
Yeah, I just want to say, to get to a point of consensus on this document, it's just going to be impossible. Like, we all already know that. But I do think it is a place to start. And if we could systematically, as Nat mentioned, just go through the document, if there's objections, state the objections. I think it's the only place we can start at this point in order to kind of move out from where we are. So I'm just all in favor of moving through it and stating objections and seeing what we can agree on, and the things that we can't agree on and people want to distance themselves from, they can also do that here, and we can just find a way to move forward out of a little bit of a stuck place that I feel like we're in now.
Erica?
And I'm excited that we're going to get going. I do want to say just one thing though, because Darnell and I are in a different position than the other 13 members of this committee. I just want to make it very clear, like, where I believe we're coming from tonight, because basically any objections that we make to anything are basically going to be our department resisting change. And that's the last thing that either of us or our department want anyone to think, because we don't believe that we know everything. And we don't believe that we can't improve, and we can't have a better relationship with the community and all those things. Like, we want those things to happen. And there's so much good stuff in this document that I wholeheartedly agree with, just speaking for myself. And I know that our department believes in. There's a lot of really good things in there, but I do think it's just really important to say from the outset that 6 weeks is not enough time to really truly go into the complexities of what goes on in human interactions as they're seen through a police department. I mean, it's humans dealing with humans, and to think that any of us could be an expert on any of this, including Darnell and I, in 6 weeks is just like, I just think we need to acknowledge the fact that this was a really compressed time frame. And this is the kind of stuff that takes years and years and years. And, Daryl was just saying that, these are the things that have been talked about forever. And we're expecting to do something in 6 weeks that's basically a miracle. And I also just think it's really important to acknowledge that not one of the 15 of us can speak for an entire population of people. I mean, we have 90,000 residents and business owners and all the other members of our community that include city employees. And to think that the 15 of us could accurately represent how they feel about public safety and well-being and all those other kinds of things. I mean, I personally think it's extremely egotistical on our part to think that we could do that. And so I am encouraged by this process. I'm looking forward to going through this document, but I just think you need to know where it is that he and I are coming from, that it's not a place of resistance. It's just that this is a really complicated thing that we've been asked to do. And just understand that as we go through it, that if we aren't agreeing with something or can't wholeheartedly sign off on an entire segment of this particular proposal, it's not that there isn't a lot of really great things that are in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. I think the idea, right, is that you guys didn't need to say this up front, because the idea is that as we go through the sections, you'll let us know what you think is good and what you don't, right? And I think the committee has grown from a place of initiating, thinking, okay, we have 6 weeks to figure this out. And very quickly, and not even members of the department, Shuli, Rasika, and others, were concerned that there wasn't enough community engagement in the process, right? And so what we decided to do, I think, was to develop a set of recommendations that were not flip the switch on September 9th, that were, this is the type of process you need to engage in to get us to this recommendation. And so I think, you know, as we go through the report, I definitely want to hear from people who think the process point is off, right? If we say, engage with the community and make sure that X, Y, and Z happens before a policy is changed, and you think there's something else that needs to happen as part of that process, that's exactly part of what we want to hear as part of this discussion tonight. Is there anybody else who wants to weigh in before we start going through this document? No? Okay. Angela, can I get you to read the introduction, or do you want me to do it?
I'd have to have it pulled up to do that, huh?
You're talking a lot, so maybe
you know what? I would love to. I would love to. Are we talking about the 44-page one? The latest one from Mark, right? Okay. Am I right, everyone? I hear nothing. Is it the 44-page one?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
Everyone all at once.
You're muted, Angela.
Okay, here we go. Santa Monica Public Safety Advisory Committee, Public Safety Reform Advisory Committee, recommendations to interim city manager and city council, August 26, 2020. Background. The interim city manager opened our first advisory committee meeting with the city's committee to join, honor, and stand in solidarity with everyone who has come together to acknowledge the systemic racism that persists in city governments, police departments, and other government institutions throughout our country. We were encouraged by those remarks and by the city's express commitment to take a hard look at its practices and policies and work toward real and meaningful change. We agree with the sentiments of the city council and interim city manager. Santa Monicans are demanding a deep soul searching about public safety and systemic racism in the wake of the tragic events this year involving police in Minneapolis, Louisville, Atlanta, Aurora, and elsewhere. These incidents are piled on top of too many others, and they shock the conscience of our nation and our city. We Santa Monicans look at these events and the massive ensuing protests in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we ask, how might the city of Santa Monica become a true leader in sound, equitable, and fair public safety and well-being, not just good or good enough? Do we want our public safety providers and police officers to have a culture where they see themselves as guardians rather than as warriors against those perceived as criminal? Do we treat all people, residents, and millions of visitors alike with respect, support, and equity? Do our policing, public safety, and well-being budgeting practices and expenditures reflect our values and principles as a community? Answering these questions is that much tougher and urgent. In a year of 3 overlapping catastrophes, the COVID-19 pandemic, the ensuing financial struggles for the city and its residents, and the national reckoning on systemic racism, including the explosive episodes in our downtown. We, the members of the Public Safety Reform Advisory Committee, 15 neighbors and colleagues with diverse backgrounds and experiences, are honored to take on this timely challenge. At our first meeting on July 22nd, 2020, the interim city manager advise us to lead a community input process, evaluate reform proposals, and ultimately make recommendations on reform, including how to best allocate resources for public safety and well-being. In the short 6 weeks since, we have talked extensively with residents, community groups, experts, and the SMPD. We have reviewed best practices from around the country and scoured dozens of reports, articles, and studies. Mostly, we have tried our best to listen. To expedite our complex task, we created subgroups for 6 areas of concern. Most committee members served on multiple subgroups, which are civilian oversight, use of force, alternate responses, culture and training, community engagement, and budget allocations. Principles. 7 fundamental principles have emerged from our discussions, outreach, and research, and have guided our recommendations. Community well-being. The overall well-being of the Santa Monica community should be a guiding benchmark for reforming public safety. As previously developed under the city's groundbreaking well-being project, the term well-being refers to how a city invests and operates to give each person within the community the opportunity to thrive and live a complete and healthy life. Under this benchmark, traditional anti-crime metrics such as stops, calls, citations, arrests, and the like are less helpful for understanding whether our people are safe and achieving well-being. These should be downplayed. Other metrics, such as crimes avoided, violence de-escalated, juvenile offenders diverted, homeless and mental health referrals made, etc., may have more meaningful implications for well-being and safety. These types of metrics should be encouraged and emphasized. The actual metrics to applied still need to be discussed and honed at length. Accountability and transparency. The police work on behalf of the community of people who live, work, and visit our city and should be accountable to us. Community members should play an active, sustained role in review and oversight, as they are now doing in cities across the country. Civilian oversight of SMPD is critical. It provides the essential formal structural basis for ongoing, substantive, and meaningful community involvement in co-producing public safety and well-being. Community oversight creates the conditions to enable more effective 21st century community-oriented policing. To accomplish this, the City Council should create an oversight body. In addition, new types of data and outcome-based metrics should be developed, and utmost transparency should be applied to sharing information on public safety procedures, activities, and complaints. You want me to continue?
I'm not sure if you should or if it's giving too much of a preview of what we want to talk about. Because I think maybe when we sit, like as we get into some of the sections, I can see that Darnell and Erica might have things that they want to say, but I'm not the president of the group. So thumbs up, read the whole introduction or not?
I think just if I could comment, all of us have had the document and we've read it. The purpose of reading it would be to share with the public. So I'm open to whatever the group thinks would be best.
It's 2 more sections and then it goes into recommendations. So
keep going.
That's where we stop.
Keep going. You're doing great.
Great reading.
Thank you. Trying to put it with feeling, you know. Okay. 1 second here. Innovation. The community should be as creative as possible in reimagining public safety. This means taking long, hard looks at how public safety currently operates and how we may change our approach to optimize overall well-being. In particular, We should expand partnerships among police, social service providers, both inside and outside the city government, community groups, and individuals. We should also explore what roles should be played by the people best trained, equipped, and oriented to handle them, as well as how to allocate community investment based on the well-being criteria that we establish. This will take time and effort. Best practices. We believe that Santa Monica should strive to identify and use the latest best practices from leading cities, law enforcement policy organizations, and other leading policy-oriented organizations and cities comparable to ours. We should strive to make Santa Monica a national leader in public safety and well-being. In keeping with our history of leadership in sustainability, governance, and civic well-being, we seek to be a progressive model for others to follow. As a leading destination city for millions of visitors from around the country and the globe, we can help demonstrate that it is possible to achieve meaningful improvements from the status quo. We do not want to be good enough. We want to be on the leading edge of reform by adhering to the best in-class policing policies and practices for a city of our size and environment. De-escalation and minimal use of force. In pursuit of well-being, force should be used only when necessary to resolve conflict and protect the public and officers. Public safety officers should continue to deploy de-escalation tactics first and exhaust all alternatives. Our overarching policy should reflect more than minimum U.S. constitutional standards and adopt the best practices. This means that when force must be used, it should be necessary and proportional and limited to tools, techniques, and practices that minimize risk to all persons involved. These standards should be applied to routine policing encounters and stops, as well as extreme situations. In addition, militarization through vehicles, equipment, and tactics should be minimized, since it is unduly projects and encourages force and may escalate situations. De-escalation and minimal use of force must also be pursued by encouraging a guardian mindset instead of a warrior mentality. We want the relationship with the SMPD and the community to be us and us, not us versus them. Equity. Should I go on or you want to stop?
You're almost done.
Okay. Equity. To support well-being for everyone, all public safety activities should be conducted in a manner that is just, fair, and equitable. To achieve equity in practice, work needs to be done to understand the history, culture, and policies that have created current conditions. Achieving equity in practice requires learning about racism, explicit, implicit, and systemic. It requires recognizing that segregated housing patterns and disadvantages in education, income levels, and wealth did not just happen randomly. We will need to train ourselves along with our officers to help bring together our shared history and help reflect on how it should inform all of our future policies. Our entire community must be involved in the effort to understand, heal, and move forward. In addition to policies, explicit and implicit biases among police personnel should be recognized and mitigated through training, supervision, and when needed, disciplinary procedures. The community itself needs to examine its own potential implicit and explicit bias, since 70% of local police calls come from the public. Trust. We recognize that the ambitious task at hand cannot be accomplished without building trust among all the parties involved: police, community members, administrators, and elected officials. All of us need to commit to working together to build trust between and among the city, the police who serve us, and the community. And I will stop there because recommendations are next.
Thank you very much. That was a very good reading.
That was very good. It was good of you to volunteer.
You didn't even practice that. All right. So now we can get into sharing our thoughts, taking our temperature, however you want to classify it, about what's in the document. So I will begin with section 1, which is, sorry, I got all wrapped up in Angela's reading. All right. So the first area of the report is around civilian oversight. The committee has developed recommendations to form a civilian oversight and reform commission based on input from the community, committee members, experts, and literature on best practices for 21st century community-oriented policing. The full proposal is fairly detailed, and the document says we recognize that the city council and the city manager may have additional ideas to help shape those proposals. 21st century community-oriented policing envisions an environment where law enforcement co-produces public safety with the community. It views police as guardians of public safety and not warriors. Community-oriented policing relies on development of trust and legitimacy between the police and the community. Part of this trust building involves being transparent, promoting procedural justice, and involving the community in policy setting and civilian oversight of police activities. Accordingly, we propose that the city council or the city manager, sorry, I'm reading a previous draft possibly, establish a civilian public safety oversight and reform commission as a vehicle to A, promote in partnership with the Santa Monica Police Department the best practices in community policing in our city for the fair treatment and safety of all. B, work with the Santa Monica Police Department and experts to develop, recommend, and help implement proposed reforms for handling complaints, including proposed reforms for the intake, review, investigation, and oversight of disciplinary decisions and policies. We propose that the scope of activities includes a review of the Santa Monica Police Department policies and practices to make recommendations for the improvement of public safety and well-being, collaboration with the Santa Monica Police Department to sponsor and or promote ongoing interaction between the police department and community members, including restorative justice, mediation, and trust building. Review and provide input on the biannual proposed budget for the Santa Monica Police Department. Promote transparency of Santa Monica Police Department data and publication of vital data and records to the public. Evaluate ideas for reimagining public safety and well-being and make recommendations to the city manager. Review disciplinary proceedings and final actions taken by the Santa Monica Police Department for violations of policies. The Civilian Oversight and Reform Commission shall have an objective goal of promoting positive engagements between the Santa Monica Police Department and individuals or community organizations. We request that the city provide funding for appropriate staff support to carry out the commission's required activities, and that the funding is found from the Santa Monica Police Department's fiscal 2021 budget for that purpose. We propose that the Civilian Oversight and Reform Commission have 9 commission members appointed by the City Council serving staggered 3-year terms. We further suggest criteria for selection and training of commission members. Let's see. Okay. Further, the committee has concluded that transparency, accountability, and the appropriate handling of complaints of misconduct by sworn officers are of vital importance to the building of trust and legitimacy between the community and the police. Accordingly, the committee recommends that the City Council instruct that within 90 days of the Commission's first official meeting, the Commission shall report to the City Manager and or the Council its recommendations for implementation of updated procedures and policies for the review, investigation, and oversight of complaints. The recommendations will be consistent with the best practices for accountability and 21st century community-oriented policing. That ends our civilian oversight section. There's no little hands up, so I will do it in a long way. So I think I'm supposed to say, does anybody have a strong negative opinion towards this section? Is there anyone who does not support the creation of a civilian oversight committee?
Lisa, can I jump in here for just a second? I think so. I think it's fine to go through and to ask those who want to jump in one way. I do, I particularly want to express my appreciation to Darnell and Erica, who not only agreed to commit their time to the committee, but actually affirmatively volunteered and applied to, because I think they really are committed to trying to move the department forward. And I don't want to put them in the position of needing to respond in full to a document that has this much implication for them and for their colleagues without more time. And so I think what may work would actually be to allow them and any other member of the committee who wants to provide information in writing as a response or another kind of opinion, so that they have the time to provide the thoughtfulness that I know they will bring to reflecting on the committee's thoughts and to pointing out some of the areas that are really important to them in their work that they really want people to be aware of. So if that works for the committee, I think that may be an opportunity for them to respond without having to go through point by point and try to explain what their views might be. And I certainly offer the same to any other member of the committee.
General feedback from everyone as we go through, and then detailed feedback in writing. Is that right?
And are we setting a particular date by which the written materials must be submitted, given the time frame?
I think for us, that would need to be Friday by end of day.
I think, Lisa, I think we can push that to Tuesday morning of next week. I know you're going to kill me for that, but
Madam Chair, I just wanted to advise the committee that I'm sorry, did I insult you?
No, you promoted me.
That I contacted the city of Pasadena, who's also a charter city in this county. And when we were talking about this topic, I think I mentioned it to Erica and Darnell, that if this thing was passed, it'd be a charter implication. And so guess what? The city of Pasadena unanimously passed this item in their city a couple of days ago, and the city attorney, who used to be a resident of Santa Monica, is going to send me the newly minted ordinance. And also they talking about, if it passes the vote, then they have to have a charter vote. So I thought that would be helpful for the committee to let you know that we used to deal with 5 cities, and then Pasadena was one of them all the time, and we cross-check each other. And I was in the position of Erica at the time before I was on the council, so we always cross-checked with the Pasadena Union people to know what's going on. They passed it unanimously to City Council. So I'll get that as soon as it comes on my Dropbox. I will get it back to Lisa, and Lisa can put it however she gets their information out to the rest of us.
Hey Nat, that's helpful. But one thing I should remind you is our subgroup did check with the city attorney and got advice that the thing that we're proposing would not necessarily invoke a change in the charter.
No, I understand that, George. I'm talking about comparability, and I know very well the people on the inside know. I'm talking basically to Eric and Darnell. We want to touch every base, and then one city attorney's office got something, give it to our city attorney's office, and we're both charter cities. There's only a few charter cities left in California, and so I just wanted to make that sure. Thank you very much. If you don't want it, I'll tell the city attorney tonight, don't send it.
Never turn down information, Nat.
Thank you.
You guys know that. All I do is send you information today. Anybody have any other comments around civilian oversight? I think for the rest of the meeting, since it's already 7:30, I'll focus on the recommendations for each section instead of reading the whole thing, but I did want to hear from people. I'm seeing a lot of hands waving now. Rasika and Liz, and who else? And did I see Shuli? Okay. Go ahead, guys.
I just wanted to make like kind of a blanket statement because I didn't see it in this portion of their proposal. I'm not sure if we've discussed like how we were going to choose the members or who's going to be part of the Civilian Oversight Committee. I don't think we got that far, but I do just want to express the importance of making sure that there's at least 2 seats for youth to join, because I think having them at that table for our community, since they are one of the biggest groups impacted by all of these changes, it's important to make sure that they're there. And it's not just one of them, it's 2, because I know as a youth, it's more comfortable and you feel more empowered when you have someone like-minded with you at the table. So just making that statement, making sure that moving forward, we highlight that as well.
That was going to be my similar comment about including youth in the oversight committee, just adding on youth of color, since they will more often than not encounter the police. So I think that would be important. So that was, we're in alignment in terms of what I was going to say.
And Shuli still here?
Yeah, similar thought on that, and definitely having that youth voice, youth of color would be a really great addition to that committee. And I would also say that part of the duties of the Civilian Oversight Committee might be to be included in interviews for especially positions like our school resource officers, NROs, the positions that are very community facing. It would be great for some of the members of the Civilian Oversight Committee to be included in interview panels to hire those folks, or when people are up for promotion who are very community involved officers. Otherwise, I absolutely agree that this is an important piece of what our city could do.
Thank you. Anyone else? Nobody? Okay, I'm writing it all down. So I'll put a lot of what you guys say in writing and send it back out so that we make sure we get everything captured appropriately. All right, so we're gonna move on to use of force. And as I said, I'm gonna really stick to the headlines for these sections.
I'm sorry, Lisa, did we get we had no negatives.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that we're covered, it's in effect unanimous I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that. On civilian oversight with some tweaks. Okay, great, got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure we were all on that.
Mark, yeah. I think you misunderstood.
Okay.
Some will speak in this meeting, some won't. They'll give their opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, all I'm saying is no expressed. That doesn't mean there aren't any. I'm just talking about what was expressed.
Don't get us off track by saying unanimous, because we'll never get out of here. And I'm an old man and I go to bed.
Okay. No, I sorry, and plus the fact that we're not voting.
Yeah,
this is directional, right? This is not a vote. So I apologize if I sort of may have got a little bit sideways there. Yeah.
Nat goes to bed at 9. He already told me when I kept him too long on a meeting, so we got to keep it going. Okay, so use of force. The headlines of use of force. Permit the use of force only when necessary to resolve conflict and protect public and officer safety. I'll read some of the details of this, but I'm really going to try to stick to just these 2 headlines and the defining bullets for the 2 headlines. The U.S. Constitution is the minimum standard. SMPD policy shall require force to be necessary and proportional. SMPD policy shall continue to require officers to use de-escalation tactics and exhaust reasonable alternatives. The second section in use of force, second headline, prohibit tools, techniques, and practices that are by their nature dangerous and usually excessive. For example, ban chokeholds, which our city has already done following the state mandate. Prohibit maneuvers that restrict blood or oxygen flow to the brain. Prohibit techniques and modes of transport that risk suffocation. Prohibit officers from shooting at or from moving vehicles. Ban tear gas and pepper spray for peaceful crowd control purposes. decommission military vehicles and equipment, and end militarized police responses. So there are additional recommendations, including specific policies for each type of force instrument, et cetera, that are detailed in the report in the appendix. But as we stop now to check in with the group, I'd just like to hear people's thoughts on this section.
I'd just like to jump in because the document that's in the appendix is very long and very detailed, to make a sort of a process statement about this, because these are kind of headlines. It's very, as Darnell said, it's very detailed and every word is important, and every term is important. What this suggests is that the appendix would be the guide for best practices in approaching use of force and reforming use of force to reflect best practices. So just so everyone knows, these are headlines, it's very detailed, but really what this is very much about is using a best practice document to look at the practices by the department and adjust accordingly, according to the standards you've heard.
Anyone else want to share any thoughts?
Thanks, Mark, for that. I second what you're saying. And we've all agreed that Erica and I, we're just going to write, any objections we have, we're going to write it and send it out. Like you said, Mark, it's very detailed, very wordy. And just something I do want to bring up, just because it'll be hard to articulate it in writing. I know just recently, maybe a day or two ago, we changed a lot of the language to shall instead of should. And instead of putting this in writing, I'll just give this to you now, just so we can put it kind of in context instead of this long objection that I'll give you guys. A lot of the things that we have in our policy that say should or feasible is for a reason. Particularly, and I'm just going to name one, in the new policy that you guys are proposing, it says officers shall identify themselves as police officers before shooting. An example that I'll give to you guys is if you're in 7-Eleven and someone has a gun to your head and I happen to walk in and I'm behind you guys, if I say and announce, police stop, there's three things that could possibly happen. Best case scenario, he'll stop, drop the gun, and we take care of the situation. 2, he gets scared and shoots you. Or 3, he turns around and starts shooting at me, and I have to make the decision to tactically get away or to return fire while you're there. Versus our language, which says, should announce as an officer when feasible, I have the ability to stop that threat right then and there and save your life. Because with the language of shall, it opens up police officers to civil liability, because an attorney is going to say, well, a family attorney is going to say, well, you killed my client without announcing that you're a police officer. But yeah, I did that to save someone's life. So when we talk about shall, there's many things. Everything that's in here, as far as I was changed to shall, it has to be changed. And I just figured I'd tell you guys that now versus writing a long, lengthy kind of explanation for that, just to kind of understand the difference between shall and should when feasible.
Darnell? Oh, sorry, Daryl. You're on mute.
I'm in Big Bear. I didn't want you guys to hear all the squirrels and stuff running around. So. And it's getting dark out here, so I had to put a flashlight on so you can see me. Anyway, I like when I was looking through the 304, the policies the semi-committee is put together as of June 6, 2020, from 2017. They've incorporated a lot of the things that we're looking at in terms of definitive things that include their action, and a lot of it does have the language shall in it, so that holds officers accountable for reasonable things that we are looking at. So there may be some discussion in that at some point, to Darnell, your point, but to our point, the language of shall, and even in terms of your excessive force and your, when you look at what they've already done, it meets the standards that we're asking them to meet. I still think there could be some improvement so that as we move forward, those things that they have complied with, we build on that, and then we find out what else serves the community. And that was just my point. I think I shared it with the committee that a lot of things the Santa Monica PD is already put into language, and we've got to make sure that's put in action and engagement. And I think that's a piece we're all interested in.
Thank you, Daryl. Anyone else want to speak on this section at this time? Seeing no one, but I'm going to get a lot of written feedback on this. Okay.
Well, Lisa, I'm sorry. Should we be asking the question that generally support with changes, do not support? Are we going to be using that rubric, or we're now doing it differently?
Using it because I think those who do not support would prefer to put that in writing.
Got it. Okay. Understood.
So I'm just opening the floor for feedback.
I would hope that we are all listening tonight. I listened to Daryl, and I literally understand the scenario that he gave, because there's a restaurant called Ray's at 29th and Pico Boulevard, and it literally happened while I was in the restaurant. We arrested the guy and took him in custody without opening our mouth, because had we opened our mouth, we'd have been in a dilemma that he described. And so I'm just hope everybody listens, because my dream is that we'll come out of this thing with a us document. You know, and I sincerely believe that. And Daryl's point's well taken. And so let's not jump on anybody till we get all the stuff. There was a technique we used to use, Darnell and Erica, called redlining. When you guys get back to the office, instead of having to rewrite all 25,000 pages, just get the doc out, redline it, make your side notes, and then photograph them and send them in. That's save you some time, okay? And it's legitimate, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. All right. Alternate responses. So let me see if there's a little bit of an introduction. See, this basically was around looking at alternative means and personnel to carry out public safety functions. So the first topic is around dispatch and response. And we have had a lot of conversations with our committee members on the Santa Monica Police Department and other officers that are not on the committee. And also heard in the presentation last week the different type of things that the officers end up responding to. So there are some recommendations about ways to diversify the bench of people who are able to respond to the various types of calls. Obviously keeping public safety at the topmost priority. Recommendation 1 would be triage calls before they arrive at dispatch by directing the public to use 311 for minor non-emergency incidents, and launch a community educational campaign on when to call 911 for emergency calls and when to call 311 for non-emergency calls. The next is to consider expanding a joint response and dispatch approach with Downtown Santa Monica Command Center. They had submitted a proposal to the committee that they would be interested in working with the police department in that way to send out some of their staff for nonviolent, low stakes calls that would come through the system. Next is to add dispatch systems interoperability to include nonprofits and other city departments, enabling them to respond to calls when appropriate. This is something that we've learned about through research and looking at other cities and the way that they're handling this. And so there are some models out there to pull for. We would obviously need to make sure that we refine it to suit Santa Monica. And then the last is to reduce the number of minor calls serviced by sworn officers by referring them immediately to alternative response personnel. These could include public safety non-sworn officers, city code enforcement officers, Downtown Santa Monica ambassadors dispatched via shared IMS, neighborhood associations and their members trained for response. There's a lot of detail to this proposal as well, but I think those bullets give the general idea of alternative responses. I see Angela.
I think we would be remiss if we did not. There was a bit of an introduction there because it also gave a little bit of data. So I think we need to kind of go back and look at the data that helped create this dispatch and response, because I know everyone really worked on trying to figure that out. So, and I think the community, because maybe some aren't going to take the time to read all 44 pages, but you know, if you could just go back and read a little bit of that.
Let's see. So 70% of daily policing assignments arise from inbound telephone calls, both to 911 and non-emergency line calls received at Central Dispatch. On an average day, the Santa Monica Police Department responds to 200 to 300 total reported incidents. The committee was unable to obtain detailed aggregated police call reports to examine trends. However, there was analysis done for a 10-day period of between August 10th and August 20th, 2020. Notable trends that emerged. Of 2,871 calls over the period, only 1% resulted in arrest and only 4% resulted in a citation or other enforcement measure. There was no ability to determine how many resulted in direct use of force, such as drawing a weapon. 35% of the calls were minor enough to result in advisals or checks okay. In another 18% of the calls, the caller or suspect was gone upon arrival. In short, most calls were for minor non-emergency circumstances or did not justify significant action, yet the vast majority were responded to by sworn officers. And the officer perspective that was provided was that we don't know what we're going to get, so we dispatch for the worst case scenario. Do you want me to keep reading, or does that cover? That's most of the data part.
That was most of the data. There were just, you know, those extra, like those final, like 5 bullet points right there as far as focus them on.
Okay. So the idea is how to, oh, that's an important part. Because it's nice. Sworn officers carry arms, make arrests, and respond to situations involving the highest level of risk. Due to their training, skill, pension provisions, and necessary organizational support, they are also the most costly of personnel. So how do we best deploy this valuable resource to enable community well-being? Focus them on the cutting edge of well-being as defined by metrics, reduce their time spent on minor low-risk calls, increase support and protection for potentially dangerous interventions by social service personnel, and find ways to bring them closer to the community. Okay, do we want to, I know there's another thing about community public safety. Do you want me to read that section as well, or do you want to respond to this part about dispatch? Nero?
I had a question. We're in COVID-19 right now, and normally during the summer, I don't know what those numbers were, but our population can swell to over 250,000 people in one day. Was that number taken into consideration in terms of projecting? I mean, it's maybe lower response now, but what would that mean in the regular, when we get back to normal, what used to be normal? I don't know. Was that factor taken in terms of, because it's significant, the number is significantly different than it was last summer. So I was just curious.
I think we did hear in the presentation last Wednesday from the police about a general breakdown of how the calls are initiated and what they respond to, and I think the general breakdown is accurate. As far as the 2,700 from that 10-day period, I don't think that's meant to be representative. It was just a sampling of data. I see your hand, Erica. Go ahead.
So that's correct. Like the overall number of calls is down right now because of COVID, but generally the percentages break out about the same. I think the only thing that I would just want to insert in here is that not like characterizing a call because it was cleared as advised or gone on arrival or checks okay doesn't necessarily mean that the call was minor. It just means that's what the determination was by the officers that ended up arriving. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these, that you know, you're not looking at the calls that were coming in or how they were reported to the police. You're just looking at basically what the disposition was of the call. And that's not always like a great gauge of what the information that's coming in, because again, 70% of the calls are coming in from outside sources. We don't have any control over how they characterize an incident. all we can do is just send out the personnel we think are appropriate. And that is oftentimes not sworn personnel. I mean, we do have a lot of civilians out in the field that are answering calls. So this is really more not necessarily about changing the idea of sending lots of different people out to calls, but just that we're generally in support of having a deeper bench that we can pull from, so that we could possibly, alternatively dispatch even more of those calls.
Any other comments on, Mike?
Yeah, and I would just like to say that that was the data that was used because no other more detailed data was provided to us. Therefore, had to use data that was able to be pulled off of the police department website that's available to the public.
Okay. Any remaining comments? Stragglers? Seeing none, I'm moving on. Okay, community public safety. This will also be referenced in the community engagement section. Let's see. This doesn't have a long introduction, so I'll just read the whole thing. Neighborhood resource officers, when well deployed, provide the essence of community public safety, building relationships with neighborhood residents and merchants through regular face-to-face contact. At their best, NROs offer a familiar, reassuring presence on neighborhood streets. Their zone deployment often also allows for faster and more targeted response to incidents. Their deep web of relationships helps them operate more effectively. In recent years, the number of NROs has been substantially reduced to a current level of 4. Due to the reduction, NROs cover larger territories and as a result conduct much of their work from the police station or their vehicles. Recommendation is to double the number of NROs to 8, restoring the previous level and corresponding to the number of neighborhood associations, reduce the size of their territories, and expand the amount of time on foot patrol. So we'll break there for comments. Rosika and Liz?
We talked about it a little bit earlier during the Civilian Oversight Committee about having some of those members be on the panels to hire the NROs and interview them. But I also think that it's important, especially for the NROs and even the SROs, if we could get members of the community specific to that beat. So let's say that there's an NRO who's being a potential NRO for a specific beat. Let's just say for example, the Pico neighborhood. It should be that people from the Pico neighborhood, 1 or 2 or however many, I don't know how many people are on an interview panel, but they should be involved in the hiring process and the interview process, because those community members are going to be directly impacted by who's being hired. Likewise, for the SROs, I think it would be important for people who work in the schools and also community programs that work with the schools and the youth that go to these schools to be involved in that process for the SROs, similarly to the community members of the neighborhoods for the NROs. So that was my 3 cents.
Thank you. Liz?
And for the NROs, I think it's also important as part of community engagement, which they tie in, is have what it says here in terms of expand the amount of foot patrol, biking the neighborhood, walking the streets, and really engaging with community. I think that's important in terms of having community connection versus being in their vehicles and just patrolling. I think it sends a different message when you're actually walking the neighborhoods that you're assigned to, and that you're biking in the neighborhood, and it just has a different feel.
Any other comments on this? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next alternate response approach. Social service interventions and programs. Let's see how I can. Let's see, we did, the committee, some of the subgroup did get to meet with representatives of Department of Mental Health, and there was a lot of research done on sort of different structures for social service interventions and programs. Let's see, I'll just read this. SMPD officers get involved in hundreds of social service related situations each year involving homeless, mental health, substance abuse, domestic abuse, and juvenile issues. Such assignments help the neediest among us and thus contribute directly to our stated goal of community well-being. Partnering with a network of providers, they assist social workers and other clinicians by providing protection in potentially hazardous situations and using their statutory power to restrain, set holds, and arrest. The alternate response subgroup encourages this type of social service support. However, this is a critical and highly complex area that demands more in-depth study by the committee. In the interim, we propose the following: increase the number and hours of interdisciplinary response teams, expand Department of Mental Health coverage to nights and weekends, explore methods to deploy clinicians more efficiently with officers, including adding more clinicians who can write 5150 holds, re-examine the protocols for assigning Santa Monica Police Department officers to assist teams to increase efficiency, flexibility, and effectiveness, investigate replicating Eugene, Oregon's CAHOOTS model program, which sends out a team of trained crisis workers and medics for crisis calls received through the Police and Fire Dispatch Center and save millions of dollars. It's a program that's being replicated in a few other cities now. Explore roles for NROs in appropriate situations. Any comments? Angela?
So how we got to that point was, like you said, we listened to the Department of Mental Health, and we could tell in not just their overall interview, but you can just tell by their energy that they are being very taxed right now. There's 2 of them on the street, and they're only on the street Monday through Friday during the day. So they're not out there on the weekends when it's lit and hot and all that extra going on. And then at the same time too, they're not out there at night. And so we knew that there is definitely a need there. And I think we've also heard that in several, conversations that we've had throughout these weeks about how we have such a large population of homeless people. And at the same time too, we know that we have a large population of those that are dealing with other struggles, addiction, alcoholism, drug abuse. We have a lot of different things that we definitely need to have some more mental health professionals out there and social workers out there. So we know that is a strong need and we need to address it. And I think by addressing it better, by providing more of those to help support the police will again lead to better de-escalation. And I would encourage other people that were on that same call or committee with me.
Liz?
Yeah, thank you, Angela, for that. Yes, I think the presentation that DMH presented, they're very much in it and are very much connected to this work, but 2 is not enough. And I think having a dialogue about expanding and having more personnel to be able to help was definitely welcomed, and wanting to have conversations with the 2 entities, city and the Department of Mental Health, to see how that can come to fruition as we're talking about alternative responses and being capable to be able to help manage a lot of the calls that do come in, whether it's domestic violence, child abuse, suicidality, or any of those type of calls. So I think it definitely helped to get perspective, but 2 people working during the day is not enough. A lot of what happens is usually in the evenings and weekends. And so it's really critical to kind of have that in mind as we continue to make these recommendations.
Thank you. Oh, I see Robbie.
Yeah, I was on that call too. I liked Dr. Howe, I think it was, who recommended, well, she just said it would be great if they would also be tapped into SMPD 911 calls, because what they're saying, because people that they have in their system often show up in the 911 calls, and it would be very helpful because they could also tell officers what they're walking into, what the situation is, because they know the client and they know the family, the system, whatever is going on. So I just think that as well as we need more mental health professionals out there, that what she said really resonated with me, just kind of looking at the whole picture of, if they were tapped in, they could, give some upfront details.
Erica?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I think there was just a minor misunderstanding with that part. So actually are on our radio with us when they're on duty. So they do have access to all the information that the officers are getting. And then we also provide all of our 72-hour hold reports and any other contacts, significant contacts that we have with people who may be in the DMH system. We do collate that data. I think Dr. Hugh was more talking about just the manpower part of it, that it would be helpful to have more clinicians because we could have more of them on duty during the week. And so they can be there and listening to the radio. It's just when we only have our clinicians there during their working hours, I mean, each of them just works 40 hours a week. There's the other time when it's not covered, where we don't have the two systems in the building at the same time. And it's something that we've worked to streamline it down. But I think having the additional manpower and having more clinicians in the building would be something that everybody would be extremely supportive of.
Nat?
Erica, are these people county or city employees?
They're county employees, sir.
Good. I'll call Barbara Ferrer in the morning and ask her to give us, how many you want?
Want a conference call Dr. Sheeran too. That would be great. We will take as many as the county would like to give to us. We would be happy to support them.
Put that in writing, please. Thank you.
Indeed.
They don't call him Mr. Santa Monica for nothing.
That's
right.
Who do you need him to call? All right, moving on to the next section. Any other comments? Okay. The next section is around programs, and this is a section where the committee acknowledged that with the wide patchwork of providers that we have to respond to community needs, it is difficult to recommend at this time which programs might be expanded or added. This exercise is complicated by current budget cuts forced by pandemic-driven financial stress. The recommendations for this are to map the network of current social programs and providers, including mission overlaps, and to continue gathering input and gathering outcomes metrics before making specific recommendations on social programs. I see one hand. Shuli.
Hi. So I think I know it can be difficult right now at this point in the process to recommend specific funding or programs, but I would like to see some language in here around prevention and intervention as a focus. I know we've been talking about the budget cuts due to COVID and how difficult it is right now just to even conceptualize how this budget's going to work. But I do feel like if we are going to invest, of course we should look at outcomes, but we know at the least, like investing in things like housing, homelessness, mental health, especially our youth programs. Like we heard some great presentations from Juvenile Diversion Program, our PAL program. We have a great network in our community of assertive case management for young people who are the most at risk. And I really feel like just from where I sit, like this is where we need to invest. We need to invest in our youth, our residents of Santa Monica, our kids that are here in our schools. And I know a lot of the crime is committed by people outside of our city, but like this is what I would like to see reflected in our priorities.
Thank you. Liz?
And I just want to echo what Shuli just shared. I think that's important given the presentation. Some of you may or may not have been privy to a lot of what is already embedded in the police department as far as the Explorers program, the Juvenile Diversion Program, PAL. There's so many great programming already that's really intentional in terms of that preventative piece. And also ensuring that, currently, I think what Shuli was sharing about the youth resource team, and we have the middle school support team, but there's also the school age, elementary age gap that we don't have. And so again, capturing our youth early on. And so I think there's opportunity for us here to really make a difference because come middle school, there's a lot of challenges that already come in for our youth. So if we catch them at a school age, which for currently there is no programming or any intentional service directed to them, could be an opportunity for this subcommittee this committee to make recommendations. So I think that that intentional language of preventative and intervention language in terms of programming and the expansion of JDP, given all of what we heard about yesterday, and having it really be a key part in this, I think it would be important.
Thank you. Angela? And then Becky?
So I guess I just want to clarify, Liz. So we're talking now more so of putting more services towards middle school, right? Because we have this huge DARE program where they have 800 graduates, but that's all elementary school. That's not really addressing our middle school and our high school, where we are finding the drug addiction issues and the suicide issues, right? So I think where you're saying, right, is that we do need to emphasize more of the middle school.
In middle school, there is a middle school support team that's through the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Monica. That's part of like the Cradle to Career initiative, but there isn't specific programming geared to school age youth, where there's holistic assertive clinical case management or a wraparound program, so to speak, for elementary age youth. There is one, again, like I said, for MSST, or middle school support team for the middle schoolers. And then when they get older, they go into a YRT if they're eligible. And that goes up to, I believe, the age of 25. Rasika can speak to it. She's a part of the program. But there isn't programming specifically for school age youth. And so capturing, again, the preventative piece in programming. And again, this is just, again, in terms of that prevention piece. I think as Shuli and I kind of work with School of the Family and Rasika, really just doing our due diligence ahead of time, given the opportunity that we have here.
No, I understand. I was just trying to figure out to differentiate when we talk about St. John's and Family Services, who are in the schools, the elementary schools.
They're in our middle schools and our high schools as well.
Right.
For mental health. But what you said, Angela, in terms of the drug prevention, really looking at there, does it work? We do have Claire Matrix as providing services for our middle and high schoolers, but we could always use more support for mental health, substance abuse, any behavioral health issue, I think is where our youth are really, especially right now, needing a lot of support.
Okay, I just want to clarify the language. And
I mean, we could talk about that all day, like what programs are good to fund and not, but we don't need to take the time here. But
no, just send your addendum.
Yeah, right. Sure will.
So you were talking about the age group. Remember, PAL starts at age 6 and goes up. So if we can pour stuff in there, start there, because that's your youngest group.
I wrote that down. Any other comments on this section before I move on? Nope. Okay. Role for neighborhood associations. So I'm trying to, let's see. Okay. I'm going to go to the paragraph right before the recommendations just to give a little bit of context, and then obviously anybody jump in with anything that you think needs to be filled in. So 8 of Santa Monica's neighborhoods have city-constituted neighborhood associations that address community concerns and advocate for their residents. We propose that the associations become active advocates for community well-being and partners in reforming public safety by serving as a fundamental relationship builder and resource for their neighborhood resource officer, engaging and educating residents to modify their concept of public safety, relationship with public safety providers, and use of police services, facilitating a process to define specific well-being outcomes for each neighborhood, encouraging active ongoing participation in achieving those outcomes, including training for neighborhood dispute mediation teams or other possible goals. Any feedback on that? Everybody likes it. Liz?
In this part, I just think we shouldn't just rely only on the neighborhood the neighborhood associations. I think it's important to include other community folks in terms of the community engagement and connection. As far as there's the neighborhood groups, there's parent groups, there's a school community. So there's different groups. So I just wanted to ensure that it's not just exclusive, like in terms of the neighborhood associations being exclusive, but being a part of.
Anyone else? Daryl likes that remark. Angela?
I'm looking on here. I just want to make sure that we're not being redundant because that all is mentioned in community engagement section, right? So I just want to make sure that we're not, making things that we are really, because I want the same thing as you, Liz, and I think it's in community engagement. So I just want to make sure that we're not being redundant, as far as emphasizing those things that are already in there. But I love it. I mean, I'm right there with you. I just want to make sure.
Okay. Okay, the next section is on community response to bias. Does someone who worked on this section want to characterize the background of it? Because it's pretty long and I don't think I should read the whole thing, but I don't want to excerpt out something that you all feel would be really important to be included. Angela?
Again, I think you should definitely read the part about the statistics. Always give them that percentage, those, in June 2020. Just a little bit of that section, like those 3 paragraphs there with the bullet points.
Okay. In June 2020, the Santa Monica Police Department provided data in response to a request from the Santa Monica Coalition for Police Reform. The provided material included Santa Monica Police Department arrests, citations, and field contacts by race 2018, 2019, and January 1st to June 15th, 2020. In summary, the data revealed Blacks are arrested 600% more, cited 300% more, and experience over 500% more field contacts with police than their percentage of the Santa Monica census population. Latinx are arrested 57% more, cited 50% more, and experience field contacts with the police 16% more than their percentage of the Santa Monica census population. Non-Hispanic whites are arrested 67% less, cited 54% less, and experience field contacts 24% less than their percentage of the Santa Monica census population. Not all of the racial disparities in the data are due to bias or profiling or racism. Police particularly cite a disproportionate number of Black homeless individuals and large numbers of regional Black and Latinx viewers as skewing the data. But we cannot deny the evidence of responses so inconsistent with population figures and how different racial groups currently experience policing in Santa Monica. Okay, so I'm gonna go down to recommendations. There are 3. Okay, create more duty time for sworn officer training on de-escalation and anti-bias by referring appropriate calls to qualified alternate people and organizations. Model desired public safety by partnering with organizations and entities that embrace proven anti-bias and equity building philosophies and practices. Implement a community anti-bias program in partnership with the neighborhood organizations to raise awareness about biased reporting of perceived criminal behavior and reduce the community calls that disproportionately and unfairly single out individuals of color. Any remarks on that?
I just have one thing, because I know Erica spoke about the stats. I don't have the stats here right now, but I just feel like these stats are a little misleading and inflammatory, specifically because I think, Erica, you spoke about it as far as most of these arrests are not our residents. Most of them are either transients or people that come into our city to commit crimes. And I don't know the exact percentage, maybe it's 4 or 5% of Santa Monica's population is Black. So I'm not really sure how this correlates as far as Blacks are arrested 600% more than the population, when most of these people that are being arrested don't live in Santa Monica. So, and I'm not a statistician by any means or anything like that. I'm just trying to understand the correlation of what this means if the people that are arrested aren't our residents.
Okay, would the idea be that it should be correlated to the county?
Well, no, actually, I mean, I think that the data that I brought in 3 meetings ago really needs to be also reflected in this section. And that was going to be something I was planning on putting in the written recommendation, because, like Darnell said, there's a lot of different pieces to this. And, you know, it's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and we're all working off the same numbers. But, you know, the way that this was broken down, you know, doesn't take into account the number of non-residents and the homeless people that were also included in those statistics that are not counted in our population statistics as of the census. So that is something that I think it would be better if we responded to that in writing to make it more complete.
Okay. I saw a lot of hands, but some of them went down. So Daryl, Angela, Nat.
With that having been said, that's community engagement or bias. If you're responding, Erica, to those calls are 70%, are those community residents calling the police on African Latinos who are homeless, or is that how the police are becoming engaged in that and it affects an arrest? Or the police, it doesn't sound like it was initiated. I just want to know, you said that the calls come in 70%. Is that what's happening? That the community, we've had that with Fay Wells, Ben Rings, that some of the community members, the white community, call the police on them. Are they calling them on these other folks too? Just curious.
Well, those are two different statistics. I mean, just generally speaking, our calls for service are 70% from the outside and 30% self-initiated. Those are not broken down. I mean, there's no way to correlate across those necessarily the racial part of it. But we have had some very notable instances where we had white residents call about mistakenly calling in about African-American residents. Yeah, that has happened.
Angela?
Yeah, I'm just going to address the elephant in the room right now. At the end of the day, in a situation like this, whether they're a Black resident or a Black person from South Central, they are Black. These numbers, the devil's in the details, it's showing that we have some type of disparity, some type of systemic racism occurring. And that's what we also, a part of this whole well-being thing, is trying to address. We're trying to go in there and we're trying to fix it. So whether they are Black from Santa Monica, Pico, or Inglewood, South Central, they're Black. We need to look at that and see what's happening.
And Angela, I agree with you, but that's not the statistics that are cited in the section. These are percentages. They're not the numbers. I mean, if you want to talk about actual numbers, those are what I would rather put in there and to separate it out so that people can make their own decisions about what they think. But like, these percentages are based on our bedroom community and not based on the people that are actually in Santa Monica at any given time. And so when you're talking about percentages, you can't compare apples to oranges. It just doesn't work. And that's what these are doing. And that's why they do need to be addressed. And you're right, they are the elephant in the room because they paint a much different picture than the reality of what enforcement looks like in Santa Monica, because we are not we're not in a dome. You know, we do have people coming in from outside. We have people who are not counted in the census. And you would actually find, I mean, I wish homeless residents were actually included in our census because you would have a much different racial breakdown in our community if you did, but there's no way to do that because they're a transient population. So I agree with you. It 100% needs to be addressed. And I think that the way we need to do it is by making this a much more complete picture in this particular document, instead of just picking and choosing some of the things that make it look that these are just not reflective of the actual reality that we see out on the street. And I really appreciate you for saying that, because I think we definitely do need to do that.
Sounds like there are multiple layers of this, and I'm just clarifying for my notes. You guys have given me a lot of homework that I have to transcribe. So there's the issue of what numbers represent the situation most accurately. And then there's the situation of what percentage of calls are being addressed to encounter Black or brown people, regardless of where they're from, and whether or not that is something that needs to be addressed both internally and also externally, as we saw the discussion around implicit bias training and educating of community members of what warrants a call for service, right? So it sounds like there are like multiple parts of that, and that there are responsibilities within all three parts. I did see lots of hands, and I don't want to erase anybody. So, Mike, I saw Linda. Do you want to talk? I saw you, but Mike, Rolinda, Nat, and Darnell.
I know that we are trying to move along quickly, so we're only reading part of these paragraphs, but I would like to say that I think the point of this section is actually something that mostly we can agree on. I'll read a couple of the parts that were omitted. Community members themselves share more responsibility than they might readily acknowledge for racial failings of our public safety system and thus our collective well-being. 70% of the calls handled by police arise from the public. They stand at the beginning of a pipeline that may end in undesirable outcomes. We have been unable to find data on cases of racial bias instigated through community calls. Subjective reports from community members and officers alike, however, support the notion of suspicious person, trespassing, disturbance of peace, and homeless calls, all over-indexing in accusations against people of color. We believe all members of the Santa Monica community need to proactively re-examine their own explicit and implicit racial bias to strive to adjust their mindset and behavior to truly contribute to the overall well-being of our city. So the point of this section is for us to note, to try and help the police to understand that since so many of these calls are coming from the outside, that this committee recommends ways in that we can work with our community to make sure that they are not adding to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, my point was the same, is that the beginning of the pipeline, it appears, to Erica's point about the 70% of calls is coming from the community. So it's going to require, and that issue, of course, is not just Santa Monica. Like, that is much larger than where we are, but just that it's going to take some education, some bias training, like more outreach to the community about why that happens. And then also still some policy within the police force to recognize when that is happening and when that that call is biased, and how to address and deal with that situation and recognize that.
Darnell?
Mike, thank you for that. Well said. I appreciate it. And just for clarity, the people that's in my subgroup, and I've mentioned it before, that I feel like I have middle ground where I understand people of color and I understand law enforcement. And the point of that wasn't to downplay the percentage, it was just to be transparent. And as far as I only have 2015's percentages, but 45% of our arrests were white, 25% were Hispanic, and 22 were Black. And with that being said, it was just to say those numbers sound outrageous when you look at it, when you're comparing it to Santa Monica consensus, when in actuality, more white people are being arrested than Blacks. And that's all I was saying. Thank you, guys.
What I wanted to say at the beginning was that one way to explain this is a footnote. I was on the tourism business here for years. We have a huge tourist population. And if those numbers don't reflect Santa Monica, you simply footnote and explain what the numbers are. And I go back to my simplistic thing. You're going to tell me, don't say it, the 3 T's. You can have numbers that are true, and you can have numbers that are transparent by identifying where those numbers came from, and the outcomes are going to make people understand. I don't think that that percentage is necessarily a critique on the police department itself. It looks terrible, but how did it get there? That's all. Thank you. Great job, Mike.
Becky, and then Angela.
So when you're working with 5-year-old data, that's what you get. We need current data. That's one thing that the city always lagged behind on, is current data. We need up-to-date data. That's the only way to smooth that out.
the other person I saw? Angela?
I was going to say, so at the end of the day, it's a collaboration and it's a collective, right? We're doing this collectively. So when I say, Erica, when I say, as we look at that and we talk about the elephant in the room, we have to, again, look at our mirror, look at our community. And like everyone is saying, we need to not only train the police, but train our community. That's what the whole community engagement is about, knowing who your neighbor is. So like we said, we don't have a Faye Wells situation. It's like knowing who your neighbor is, making sure we all know each other. And we get to that point where we no longer have a high rate of these type of situations where it's like, oh, I see this Black person walking up to this apartment. I don't think they live there, when actually they've been there like 5 years. So it's those kind of things. Everybody getting to know your neighborhood, walking through the neighborhood, getting to know everyone. Post-COVID, of course, but that's the overall goal. And when you do that, you start to what? Everyone starts to learn about each other. Everyone starts to know who your neighbor is, and you bring down the biases, right? Because that's our whole goal, is to bring it all down. And everybody is trying to be right here, and a whole new Reimagine Santa Monica thing.
Thank you, Angela. And then I'm going to go to Darnell, and then I'm going to move on to the next section. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Daryl. Keep mixing your names up today. Go ahead, Daryl.
Is that I agree with Angela. So I'm not going to give a pass on racism. That was out and out racism, but we do need to become together as a community. But that the elephant in the room is still racism. And what happened to Faye and Vin, that's racism. It's not anything else. So we do have to learn to know each other, but that's still an elephant we still have to deal with.
Thank you. Okay, and one of the things, that we've said throughout the process since we've had subgroups, right, is that a lot of these things are interconnected. So just because these are in different sections, it doesn't mean that they're not related to each other. And so we haven't even gotten to the community engagement section yet, but there is a lot in there that addresses a lot of what's being said right now. So I'm gonna keep it moving. Let's see, culture and training. Does anybody have background that they feel really strongly needs to be shared in this section, or can I go to recommendations? See nobody.
I think Mike should speak on it.
If I say go to recommendations, you're going to say I'm trying to go to bed.
You got 35 minutes left.
Mike, you're darn it.
I'll touch on it. So, we just think police culture is important because, it touches all parts of the police department and every interaction that they have with community members. And so, our recommendations for culture followed the same culture and training followed, some of those principles that are outlined at the beginning of the document, especially transparency, especially well-being, both from that of the community and for that of the officers, because if there's an officer that's unwell, then the community is unwell. And as you'll see, again, a culture of community engagement. That's something that I think is really a huge principle of this. And then on the training portion of it, we really would like to see training that is shown to be effective in scenarios that the police are going to be in. Not just classroom training, which for adult learning has shown to be quite ineffective across all aspects of it. So the idea is just stick to the principles of this community well-being, transparency, community engagement, and equity, and those are what drove the recommendations.
Thank you, Mike. All right. All police training must be posted on the Santa Monica Police Department website. The date, subject, and duration of the training must be posted for all training in the last 6 years. A schedule of upcoming training must be posted as well. The police must tie each training to a specific and measurable outcome. The Police and Civilian Oversight Board will work together to determine the outcomes and the time frame to achieve those outcomes. As Mike just mentioned, scenario training is preferred to classroom training, which is preferred to video-based, self-based training. Officer duties can include high adrenaline scenarios, and their training shall match those scenarios. Adults retain a small amount of information in classroom settings, and when you add a high adrenaline workplace, classroom training proves to be even less effective. Police must partake in each of the following training sessions twice a year: implicit bias or critical race theory, adolescent development, violence and de-escalation, mental health awareness, trauma response, transgender awareness, Santa Monica history, police, and the community. For the above training, during one of the 2 sessions in a given year, the training will have a restorative justice component, where members of the community come into the police station and participate in restorative conversations. If training with community members has to be cut short, it must be made up within a 3-month period. If necessary, the training can take place during roll call. In addition to the current support offered to officers, the chaplain, peer, therapist, it will be mandatory that officers attend a 1-hour session with a police department approved therapist every 6 months. Furthermore, after an officer is present at the scene of a death, violent crime, or the officer discharges his or her weapon, the officer must attend an additional mandatory 1-hour session with a police department approved therapist. Each officer shall meet with the same therapist if available. Include in the officer evaluation process positive contacts and pre-arrest diversions, and officers shall submit to a random drug test once per year. Any feedback on those? Julie.
I have to preface this with an apology to the rest of my group for not making the last meeting, because that's where I should have been talking about this. But in terms of redundancy, we talked about redundancy before. I feel like the coupling restorative justice with the training doesn't necessarily make sense. Both are super important, but I feel like it's kind of 2 different processes. So yes, to restorative justice, like if a community member feels that they've been wronged, harmed, and needs that healing circle, they should be invited into a process, as should the police officers that were part of that. But I feel like training is a little bit different. I missed the conversation, so maybe I missed something important, but that's just kind of where it landed with me right now.
Go ahead, Angel.
So the difference is in this aspect is that this approach is training the officer on how to approach restorative justice, how to have that courageous conversation should they need to. So that's the difference. That's not the actual restorative justice. This is the training to prepare you for going into that situation that you might have to go into. So that's where that came from. And Robbie or Mike, okay, you got to correct me, but that's
okay. That wasn't clear when I read it or heard it. Thank you.
We can try and clean it up to make it a little more clear.
Okay.
Rosika?
In regards to the piece about the PD mental health and like officers going to sessions, completely agree. Police, PD mental health is like something that needs to be like expanded upon, and there needs to be more. There just needs to be more of it. But I think as a whole, like the entire department, not just officers, need that as well. But I also wanted to just point out that there might need to be some policies in place that make it more comfortable for these officers who experience these things to go and speak to someone, like honestly, because if I'm a police officer, I know that if I say something or if I'm honest about what I'm feeling or what I'm seeing, I could get taken off duty. And because it's my livelihood, because it's my job, I would much rather lie and not tell the full truth and really talk about what's going on with me because of that. So I think if we want to kind of cultivate this mental health piece for them and push for them to take better care of themselves, there should be policies in place with that specific therapist, or just something that allows them to be honest and not have it be negative for them, not have negative implications, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I saw Angela and Nat.
So to answer that, and that actually came up, Robbie, Mike, myself, we talked about it, and Darnell, and the theory was that hopefully they can choose their therapist to create that safe space, right? Because you may not want to go to the therapist on this list. You may have someone else that you'd rather go to, an approved therapist. And that creates that safe space confidentiality. So we did think of that, and we'll reword it to add that language to it. And then Nat, and then Liz.
Question, Erica, isn't this a union obligation now? Don't you? How do you get your therapy now?
So actually, our department does participate in a blind billing program. So we have a psychiatrist who's local in Santa Monica who will refer officers out to other psychologists, and then all the billing goes back to this main psychologist, and he removes all the names from the bills, and then they're submitted to the city to be paid. So we actually do have a program like that that's run by the city, and it's available to all the officers, actually all the members of our department.
See, that's good, because the integrity issue was in mine, and you got it covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Did I see Liz?
Yeah, I just had a couple of things that came to mind. Was in terms of the training, I think we have people in the community that can provide training as far as to give context to some of these topics that are being shared. As people share, for instance, you know, whether it's mental health awareness or trauma, things of that sort, I feel like there's already people within the community. I know Robbie, and again, I know there's overlap with some of these comments and recommendations in terms of training, but in terms of using folks in our community as part of the training or onboarding or educational piece. I'm thinking, for instance, I believe the police department had the implicit bias training by a local nonprofit, Peace Pros, who are from people from the community who include mental health people. And so just kind of keeping that in mind as far as using our own internal resources who can also contextualize a lot of this information in their training. And then the other piece was I read through saw the Urban Peace Institute. I think using organizations similar to organizations like that in terms of giving the macro lens and perspective in doing this work. So finding organizations alike in terms of guiding this work and moving the recommendations that were provided in the committee.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I think this is the one that everybody will smile about. Community engagement. We all like that. Okay, so I'm going to, again, just skip to the sentence right before this period of recommendations, knowing that everybody can add anything else. To bring the community into the public safety process, address long-term issues, and heal decades of community hurt, we suggest a sustained program of community engagement that includes the following proposals. Restorative justice and healing restoration. Conduct conversations and forums to address tensions between the community and police. Bring back the African American Community Academy on Policing, which is specifically geared towards the historical relationship between the Black community and the police. The purpose of its cultural competency training is to strengthen community and police relations by building a mutual trust and respect between SMPD sworn officers and members of the local African American and other ethnic communities. Sports and cultural connection. Create broader opportunities for police and community to engage via sports, music, and other cultural events. For example, sworn officers can organize sporting events with youth outside of PAL to reach a broader youth base. Sports and recreation interactions for all city residents should also be considered. Tours, etc. Police station tours and walkthroughs, police substations in multiple areas of the city, for example, Virginia Park and 3rd Street. SWAT show and tells. More frequent communication. Make community outreach, periodic checks part of the police culture. An example of this is requiring officers during their shift to engage with the community in such places of worship, such as places of worship, businesses, schools, parks, etc. Post on Nextdoor regarding major incidents. PD newsletters at least once a month to promote transparency regarding arrests, use of force, and critical incidents. increase community meetings to answer more calls and community concerns, articles from the police department on Santa Monica locals who also work in the city, community courageous conversations covering a wide range of topics held monthly or quarterly, city-sponsored advertising of alternatives to calling 911 for situations like domestic violence, sexual assault, mental health, school-related problems, and traffic issues. PICO neighborhood. As part of onboarding training for new officers and leadership, ensure there is intentional training on the history of community police relations, specifically in the PICO neighborhood. Having community members share the history and how community police relationships have evolved can reinforce the department's effort to build community. Host National Night Out in the PICO neighborhood versus at the Public Safety Building. This makes the event accessible and inclusive to many families that would not otherwise attend. Schedule a meet and greet specifically for Beat 3 PICO neighborhood, introducing the new officers to the parent community group, PAL, Familias Latinos Unidas, and youth to help foster connection, dialogue, and begin to build relationships. When assigning a beat officer to Beat 3, make sure that he or she share the vision and have the skills to engage the community, be bilingual, be a person of color to reflect the community, and to reach out to the community. The beat officer shall be seen often in checking in with local parent groups, respective schools in the area, and take part of community programs, events, or meetings. Ensure beat officers assigned to Beat 3 participate in the Virginia Avenue Park board meetings, shall they resume back in person or online. In the past, attendance has not always been consistent, and their presence is truly helpful and informative. That's our community engagement section. Any comments? Angela?
Yeah, I think we just want to circle back, and I hate to do this, but my spirit is moving. I just want to circle back real quick to the Urban Peace Institute. We listened to that panel, and I'm sure others can speak up as well, but we just didn't see it as a good fit. The demographics that they serve is very different, and by the time, and we looked at it even from a budget perspective, by the time that we pay for assessments prior to execution and planning, it's starting to really tap in. And I'm going to stand back and let Robbie or Mike or someone else speak on it. But
is there a specific recommendation for them in here? I was reading really quickly.
Liz brought it up, and I just wanted to clarify that specific question. I know you said some like them, but that specific one was just not a good fit.
So she brought up Peace Pros. Those are different people.
She also brought up Urban Peace.
Oh, she did? Okay.
Yeah. And no, they weren't a good fit. I think there were several questions given to them in regards to who they worked with and what they worked with. And, actually they had to backtrack and say, no, they didn't really work with Beverly Hills on certain issues. So, I agree with Liz in a sense. We pull people from the community. We have a lot of resources here and people who would benefit. The African American Community Academy was pulling from Santa Monica College a lot of our professors to actually facilitate some of the groups. So there's a lot that we can look at here. People that understand our community, that are actually from our community, that maybe we need to look at them first. And I hope at the end that you bring us back, Lisa, because I kind of had my hand up in the chat and it was overlooked. And so I don't want to go back right now, but if we have that opportunity, or maybe I'll just write in. Either way, it's fine.
Closing remarks for any hands that
Okay.
I have moved to a 2-computer system because my hand got tired from writing notes by hand. So
no,
no
worries. I still love you.
I do see Liz.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the substation at Virginia Avenue Park. I think that's historically not been a good idea. I think Virginia Avenue Park has really been transformed over the years as the hub of the community where we have resources and connection and service providers. And given the context of what we're doing here, I don't think it's a good idea to have the substation come back to Virginia Park. I think we worked really hard to have HTA, YRT, and other organizations be a part of the community and really create a different environment in terms of that preventative and social service support. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that.
So hearing that we want to, a beat officer that's sensitive to the Pico neighborhood makes sense. A substation is a little bit different. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Rasika?
Two things. The first, just a little bit of clarification. When it says articles from the PD on Santa Monica locals who also work in the city, what does that exactly mean? Just for my own understanding, what exactly is that?
So that was something that certain people from the police department thought about, as far as just highlighting some of the people in the neighborhood, whether they're small businesses or things that they're doing for the community. It was just kind of articles just highlighting some of the things that the people in the city are doing.
Okay, thank you. And then the second thing, just to mention just make sure that it was kind of clearly stated that I know we talked about, oh my gosh, when the community would go in, the African-American community would communicate with PD during the trainings or whatnot, just to make sure that we also include part of the other ethnic groups and especially bilingual, just so that, our Ethiopian communities, our Latinx communities are represented as well. I know it is, just so that, everyone watching also knows that it's included in there, just to make it more, official.
Okay.
Very good.
Anyone else? Okay. Budgetary allocations. All right. I feel like I should just let somebody else read this whole thing. Let's see.
Would you like me to summarize?
Yes, please.
He's good.
So everything, all of these recommendations lead to the budget in one way or another. But in the time frame that we had, we were unable to really take what we would call a bottom-up approach, where we go line by line and try and put a cost to every one of these changes and total them all up and then see where our budget changes fall. So instead, we have taken a top-down approach, where we let the principles, again, at the beginning of the document, specifically equity and well-being, where we let those principles drive a more general reallocation of resources. And so in taking that approach, what we did was we looked at the departments within the general fund budget that we think most affect community well-being, and then try and place some equity amongst those. And as you all have heard throughout this conversation, community services is something that the committee is very passionate about and sees that as the leading edge of well-being in the city. So the community services department was taken into account. A lot of community services, type of services, happen within the library system. And so the library was included. And then, of course, the police are a part of the community well-being as well. And so what we did was looked at the changes from the 2019-20 budget to the 2021 budget, and saw that library was cut by 35%, community services was cut by 21%, and police was essentially flat. And so what we wanted to do was look at what would these numbers look like if all three of those departments saw equal changes to their budget year by year. And so when you run the numbers, that ends up being a 7.5% decrease to all three of those departments. And then Lisa, I'll let you run into read the details from there.
Okay. So recommendations: proportionately reallocate the general fund within the 2021 City of Santa Monica budget to invest in public safety as defined as community well-being. $8 million would be reallocated from the current police department budget based on the following rationale and calculations. The general fund was cut by 24% for the fiscal year 2021 adopted budget, a decrease of $112 million from fiscal year 1920. The community services budget was cut by $6.3 million from $30.7 million to $24.4 million. The library budget was cut by $4.6 million, a 35% cut from $13 million to $8.4 million. Meanwhile, the police department was effectively increased by 1%, or $600,000, from $98.3 million to $98.9 million. If the three city departments most directly attributable to and responsible for community well-being were all treated equally in this pandemic-related reduction, each would be reduced proportionally by 7.5% versus the fiscal year 1920 budget. This would bring the police budget to $91 million, which is close to their budget of just 2 years ago, fiscal year 18-19. It would free up $8 million for other entities, whether within the city government or through outside public or private partners to provide public safety and well-being services. These funds shall be reallocated based on our stated principles to the recommendation areas as outlined in this document. Civilian oversight, 1 non-SMPD staff person to help organize and support the commission. Use of force, expertise to analyze and draft policy and practice reforms. Alternate response, in dispatch, spend funds towards enhancements to 311, joint dispatch with DTSM, community education programs about dispatch changes. In response partnerships, allocate resources to code enforcement, DTSM ambassadors, library program staff, and social workers. Social service interventions would increase funding for the number of hours, the number and hours of interdisciplinary response teams, and expand Department of Mental Health coverage to nights and weekends. Social service programs will continue gathering input and gathering outcomes metrics before making specific recommendations on social programs. Note, additional neighborhood resource officers would come from internal reassignments, not new FTEs. Training, recommended training programs and curriculums would be funded. Community engagement, fund recommended engagement programs. Neighborhood associations could receive training for neighborhood dispute mediation teams or other possible roles, anti-bias and other educational programs. At this early stage of the committee's process, we cannot specify the amounts and recipients of these reallocations with precision. More research and discussion are required to understand costs and staffing needs inside and outside city government. Timing is also an issue given the ongoing pandemic. Note, in this analysis, we have not included any potential operational savings from decommissioning vehicles or weapons systems. Additional note, scheduled 2021 contract negotiations with police officers unions will certainly impact the short and long-term implementation of our recommendations and will continue to be an area of special interest for the committee. Comments? Rolinda.
Just one thing to add that I didn't have in before was, and I know we talked about programming, but just protecting existing programs, even within the police department, that are performing well, such as PAL. So we just saw their presentation. I can't remember if it was yesterday or day before yesterday, but again, that's something that we definitely want to protect, even with cuts that are being proposed.
Thank you. Anyone else?
And add juvenile diversion to that as well.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think it's just also in just ensuring there's specific language as to, we may not have the, what that may look like, but if we're going to be intentional of what we want the budget to be geared towards, that there's specific language so that it's whoever takes it on or the next level, it's geared in that direction. Just kind of like Rolinda said right now, like ensuring that there's secure funding for PAL, that there's secure funding for JDP, so specific language so that there's that intentional effort.
Okay. Anyone else? Everybody's gonna write it down, put it in later. Okay. That's it, guys. The rest is acknowledgements. I do want to share some of these acknowledgements for our city manager, Lane Dill, for entrusting this group with the assignment and her guidance in fulfilling it. Skip Lisa Parson, the Police Department, the Housing and Human Services Division, the Department of Mental Health, Downtown Santa Monica, Michelle Whittigan, the Santa Monica Coalition for Police Reform, and all of the people of Santa Monica who expressed their thoughts, concerns, and hopes. I do want to personally editorialize that, you know, the public safety reform mailbox got a lot of comments from the community as well that I forwarded on to committee members in support of this work, and very diverse perspectives, just like the committee. But hope that the community continues to stay engaged with these issues as it moves forward. And, you know, just to characterize, I'm very impressed with all of you and all of the time that you put in. I think we definitely did a bait and switch on you and said 6 meetings, and then that turned into 106. But it was a testament to the passion that everybody had, right, for the work at hand. And just really appreciate you all devoting all this time and all this mental energy and passion to these topics, and the commitment that all of you have made to stay engaged as this work moves forward, which is really important. And I think having the majority of these meetings be, recommendations be about how to move forward is a really important part of this document. So now I will open it up to closing comments from all of you. I think I'll just call on everybody so everybody talks. It's 8:53. 1 minute per, just kidding. No, none of you will keep to 1 minute. Mark.
First of all, it's been a pleasure. We're going to keep working, I think, because as Lisa said, this is just the beginning. But our hope is that this document starts a process that will be ongoing and will get us in the right direction, and that we can tackle this as an entire city with well-being as the goal and the metric. And I think what I see throughout this document is that this is not the police must do this, the police must do that. This is about the community and what it needs to do together, the police being a part of the community. So we all have responsibility, and I think we'll help people shoulder that responsibility. But thanks for shouldering all this responsibility ourselves. So I'll pass it on to the next person.
Yeah, we let Nat go to bed.
Nat, go ahead. You have 6 minutes. You still have 6 minutes.
You're bad.
Okay.
I've enjoyed this, and you know, I'm sort of like a cheerleader. I believe it's a community win if we can get something out of this. And I realize if I'm sitting in the city manager's office, money, money, money. But I think that Santa Monica has a reputation of being a leader in more fields than you know. And I think we'll be a leader in this field. I'm glad to be around and offer a bit of counsel when it was available. Thank you very much. Job well done for everybody.
I'm just going in the order on my screen, so I'm going to go to Darnell.
I just want to thank everyone from the committee for being a part of this and all of their time and effort. I know it was a lot on everyone. Hopefully we continue to work with each other, and this is a part of, you know, making change and restructuring things and fixing things within our city. So I'm very appreciative of everyone's hard work, and I hope that we continue to listen to each other and work towards the betterment of the city. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Becky?
So I just want to say that change has to come. It starts here with the community meeting the police department and the city. That's the only way we're going to change things. It has to be a mutual meeting.
Julie?
Yeah, to echo everyone else's thanks, just to everybody for your time and effort. I know it's not easy to do all these million meetings. I want to say just a special shout out to Lisa. I see you with your little baby, and Raylinda with kids, other people. You know, it's just like everyone has my kids are a little bit older now, so I can shoo them out of the room. I'm just saying, I know how hard it is to parent and do real meaningful work like this. So special shout out to everybody. You know, all of us, everybody's got stuff going on. Honored to be part of this. I really appreciated just getting to hear a lot of the history of Santa Monica. I've been here 15 years, but some of y'all have been here your whole lives. And so just knowing and getting to be part of that, just witnessing some of the storytelling has been an honor. And I look forward to seeing you all in real life one day. see on the street and be like, oh, I recognize this part of your face. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing what comes of this.
Liz?
Yeah, just to echo those sentiments, thank you to everybody. I think for me, this process, and for all of us, I think I felt the intention of creating a humanistic, healing, collaborative, flexible, attentiveness and attunement to what needs to happen and the complexities of it all. But I think all of us were open-minded and really just collaborative and just trying to really do the best we can to keep our community of color and the police department. And so really just staying open. So I'm so appreciative to have been a part of this, and thank you to all of you, and thank you to the community tuning in. And for those who called in or sent emails or responses or have talked with any one of us, I think it just speaks to the importance, the value, and the significance of this work. And this is like someone else said at the beginning. So thank you, everybody.
Robbie, you can get double time because I skipped you before. Can't hear you.
You're on mute, Robbie.
Can't hear you.
Okay.
There we are.
Yeah. Just want to say it is still my pleasure to serve my community always, especially during this double pandemic, COVID and racism. I just want to say it was great meeting all my new community members. This is family now. We've been in this, right, guys? Wow. I'm talking to you guys like 2 and 3 times a week, sometimes a day. So it's like family. I'm just excited because I never dreamed that in my lifetime that I would see something like this. I fought for it. I've always fought for it, but never thought that we would come to this, especially in a pandemic. But God has his funny ways of making things happen, making people sit down and get on a screen and work things out. So I'm just grateful, and I'm ready to continue and do the work. And I just say hats off to Lisa. I don't know how you did it. And thank you, Lane. And thanks to everybody on here. Onward.
Thank you, Robbie. Mike?
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you, Lane, for putting together this committee. Lisa, you should never have skipped yourself in the acknowledgements. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. My email inbox will miss you when this is over. I wanted to say thank you to those who wrote this document. It's very easy to critique, but very difficult to put together. If we made jokes about, reading 44 pages, imagine writing 44 pages of it. So thank you to those of you who did that. And so, once we're finally done and our baby, this document goes on, I trust you, Lane and Lisa, to shepherd this document on to the city council. And I heard it on Zooms directly from the mayor and other council members that they really want to see meaningful change. And I hope that they stick to those words. Thank you.
Thank you. Rasika?
I just want to say thank you as well to everyone, and to also, Lane and Lisa for allowing me to be a part of it. I had no idea who decided that, but thankful that I was chosen and was able to have, a voice and be the voice of my personal community. I also just want to say that this is the very beginning. This is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much work that has to be, pushed forward, and the momentum cannot stop here. So I don't want to think of this as closing statements, because for all intents and purposes, this is just the start. So, yeah.
Thank you. Rolinda?
I just want to echo what everyone has said. I'm really appreciative to be a part, or to have been a part of this committee, or whatever happens next. Santa Monica is a really special place. I know that there's a history there that I've only lived here 7 years, that I'm not a part of that long history and the trauma, and I really appreciated hearing about it from Nat and Daryl and everyone, Becky, that have just added so much color to the experience. I want to also thank Erica and Darnell. I'm sure this could not have been, an easy process for you all. And I think that just working together and just the passion from everyone on the committee to just work together and try to make change happen is just really important. And I appreciate us being as just trying to be proactive and not turn into a place that is synonymous with something more tragic. I just think Santa Monica is so special, and I'm glad that we are just taking the efforts to try to protect it, each and every one of us. So I appreciate that, and really appreciate you, Lisa, and Lane as well. So
thanks for that. Erica?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody. I mean, the courage and the collaboration in this room was really amazing. But I did want to finish with my utmost respect for Nat Trivis, the mayor of Santa Monica. Without him, there is no me. I mean, I can't discount that at all. Hearing his stories and understanding what he did with our department and for our department, and being able to follow in his footsteps is really an honor. And so I just wanted to say thank you for staying up to 9:04 at least, so I could give you due props, sir. Thank you so much.
Wally?
The sentiments that everyone has said is very enriching, and I'm glad to have been part of this and honored. I have nothing really more to add. There's a lot to absorb in this document, and I look forward to sharing and hearing what we all do together. So thank you. Onward and upward, Robbie. That's it. I got it.
Daryl?
Thank you. I've enjoyed it too. I just hope that the work we've done or continue to do, those that came behind us, so maybe in 2 or 3 generations, they won't know what this feels like. Maybe they will experience it. That's it.
George?
Yeah, well, it's great going towards the end, because I can say, yeah, same as what everybody else said. But I'm also grateful. It's been an extraordinary process so far. I love Rasika's point that hopefully it's the beginning of a process and not a closing. I so much appreciated the opportunity to get to know all of you on this committee, and I've been so excited to see the range of talent and commitment, and people have been working in the community for a long time, and you all brought it full force, and we're ready to go on such short notice. And I also want to thank Erica and Darnell, and I know you guys have a hard job, and you're trying to, trying to get your points of view across, and it's hard to do. And I do believe that, assuming we go forward, we're all going to have to find a way to work together. And you can't write down a set of rules and say, here, take this PD and go do that. It's going to have to be, we're going to have to find a path. And so I look forward to possibly being part of doing that.
And last but not least, the woman who should get her own podcast after her fantastic reading voice. Angela.
Wow, thank you. First of all, I'm humbled to again be appointed, right? To sit here. I mean, we are in essence creating history, right? We all took up the call to action and we said, yeah, let's all work together to reimagine, right? What policing would look like here. And so like I said, I'm humbled. I'm thankful for Lisa, for City Manager Lane, for for being able to sit up under Nat and Robbie, right? And just learn about the history here in Santa Monica. and learn about the possibilities that we can do, right? And then to be able to work with all of you, all of you emerging leaders, right? All of you community activists, whether you want to be or not, you are now. So I mean, and God bless you, Darnell and Erica. When I'm passionate like that, it's because I love you and I want you to see what I see to a certain extent, so that sometimes you're so close at seeing, and I just say you, but I mean we as a people can be so close to something that we don't see what someone else sees. And so it was that whole give and take where I wanted to make sure that everybody understood where everybody else was at so that we could meet in the middle, because that's what community policing is all about. And so I'm excited that we are creating, quote unquote, the playbook, right? And I'm like Rasika and everyone else when I say, I hope to continue this journey. I hope that, we can talk about this years from now and we can see the change, so that I know that I no longer have to have the talk with my kids about, careful when you go outside, matter of fact, just do not engage. It's like, you don't want to any longer have to have those conversations. So again, I am just thankful. I'm blessed to have new friends. Hopefully I can call you guys friends, and post-COVID, we could all go out and, break bread. So again, I'm grateful and I'm thankful, and especially to our writers. God bless you. That's the heavy lifting right there, and again, I think we're in a good place, and we just, we're just all lift up high energy that City Council looks at it and says, okay, great job, folks. Let's move on to the next phase. So that's where I'm at. I'm hopeful. I'm thankful. And I love this group. We were all passionate. We all loved, we fought, but that's what family does, right? We're family now.
Thank you, Angela. I will give it to Lane.
Great. Well, I want to start, of course, by thanking Lisa, who has just done extraordinary work here. I thank her every day, but she really has just been fantastic in leading this process through. And I want to thank each of you. Obviously, in creating this committee, I took somewhat of a risk to say the best thing is community collaboration and engagement. And I know we need to move quickly, but we can't do it without community engagement and collaboration. And we need to do that for real. I appreciate, when the applications came in, we worked very hard to try to find voices from different parts of the community, and voices who would bring different experiences, different skills, different perspectives, but a real dedication to the future of Santa Monica. And I believe that we have been really successful there. So as I look at the city from the city manager seat, and George and Mike and Mark spoke with me earlier, and I was talking a little bit about these days, and these days are historic in so many different ways, and as we have been through a pandemic and budget cuts and an economic crisis and all of these things, there are many ways where I see us at, in some moments in history, our lowest moment. But then we have voices on the street who are calling for change and calling for us to seize a moment and to jump on that moment. And as I see the future of Santa Monica, I really do see that together as a community, we are building, right? So from this moment, we hope that we are building, and we're always building forward. So while we're doing the work, we're always looking to the future and creating the future. And so I hope that you as a group will continue to collaborate, to engage, and to be together, and to be part of our future as voices in the community. And I want to give you my assurance that we will do everything we can so that when you look back in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you can see the work that you did together in our community. So we have a lot of stages and processes to go. We'll go to council on September 8th, but that's only the very beginning. We will continue the work, and what I am looking for from this process is that when we all look back and say, whoa, we did that, and we did that together as a community. So I really appreciate you being part of the process, and really appreciate you being part of the community and working together to move Santa Monica forward. So thank you to everybody, and we will be in touch soon. Thanks.
One last thank you to City TV, who's been our silent partners connecting this work with the rest of the community and broadcasting and make sure everybody can see. So
yes, thank you, Marcus. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Be well.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Yeah.
Safe, be well.